2,700 years ago, a single state controlled half of the known world. 20 years later, it was entirely gone, erased so completely that even its name was forgotten by the people living on its ruins. Under King Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire reached its zenith. It was the world's first true global superpower. The state swallowed up neighboring kingdoms, stretching its borders all the way from Egypt to the mountains of Iran. This vast territory was managed by a highly centralized, ruthlessly efficient administration. The Assyrians perfected the art of systematic warfare and mass deportation, trampling their enemies and operating as an unassailable military machine. In 631 BC, King Ashurbanipal died. Without a formalized succession law, his death created an immediate power vacuum at the very top of the state. The absolute power of the king was the empire's only foundation. Without it, the state entered a terminal 20-year countdown. Ashurbanipal's sons turned on each other to claim the empty throne. The resulting struggle plunged the Assyrian heartland into a brutal, protracted civil war. This infighting burned through the state treasury. To fight their own brothers, rival claimants pulled elite garrison troops away from the distant borders, leaving the empire's frontiers completely exposed. Because the Assyrian system concentrated all decision-making power in the capital, the local provinces couldn't govern themselves. The empire was all head and no body. When the central leadership fractured, the entire global administration paralyzed. This chart tracks historic rainfall and population levels, mapping a climate shift that would eventually break the empire's agricultural back. For 2 centuries, Assyria had flourished during a megapluvial, a period of unusually high rainfall that supported an unnaturally large population in the semi-arid heartland. Right as the civil wars broke out in the 620s BC, the climate violently shifted. Precipitation levels dropped into a severe 125-year megadrought, leaving the empire with a massive, starving population and no way to feed it. Unlike their southern neighbors who relied on river irrigation, the Assyrians depended entirely on seasonal rain. The sudden drought triggered widespread crop failure, hollowing out the empire's agricultural core. The empire was caught in a lethal trap. At the exact moment it needed a unified response to feed a starving desert, its military and political leaders were locked in a civil war. Outside the capital, the victims of centuries of Assyrian military campaigns watched this chaos unfold. They sensed the paralysis and the famine, recognizing a rare window of opportunity. In the south, a rebel leader named Nabopolassar drove the distracted Assyrians out of Babylon. He then marched north, forming a massive military coalition with Cyaxares, the king of the Medes in neighboring Iran. In 614 BC, this combined force struck their first major blow. They besieged and sacked Assur, the ancient ceremonial and religious capital of the Assyrian state. The destruction of Assur was psychologically devastating. It signaled to the entire world that the god Ashur could no longer protect his own city. The ideological glue binding the diverse, conquered elites to the empire dissolved overnight. 2 years later, the coalition converged on the primary capital of Nineveh. At the time, this was the largest city in the world, protected by massive, heavily fortified stone walls that seemed impenetrable. To break the siege, the attackers diverted the flooded Tigris River directly into the city's foundations. The water washed away the heavy stone walls, allowing the Medes and Babylonians to pour inside and burn the capital to the ground. A small remnant of the Assyrian administration managed to flee west to the city of Haran, but in 609 BC, the coalition forces cornered them there, wiping out the last remaining pocket of resistance. An extractive state relies on constant intimidation to survive. When that intimidation falters, the very people the state has oppressed inevitably unite to dismantle it. The destruction was so thorough that it effectively erased the Assyrians from the map. Just 2 centuries later, the Greek historian Xenophon marched an army of 10,000 men straight through this exact region. Xenophon recorded passing massive, crumbling mounds of dirt. He had absolutely no idea he was walking directly over the ruins of Nineveh. The local memory of the world's greatest metropolis had already been wiped clean. Modern scholarship interprets the fall of Assyria as a cascading systemic failure.
This diagram shows the state's fatal liabilities, the exact traits that fueled their dominance: a booming population, centralized command, and an extractive economy, eventually formed a deadly combination. These features functioned during periods of ample rainfall and strong leadership, but when the water dried up and the throne sat empty, those strengths inverted into massive vulnerabilities. A society optimized purely for continuous expansion and dependent on ideal climate conditions leaves itself no margin for error. But if the environment shifts and the core weakens, even a superpower can vanish completely into the sand.